Welcome. I am Sonalde Desai. I'm a professor and center director at NCER's National Data Innovation Center. I hold a joint appointment as a professor at University of Maryland. As we celebrate Women's History Month, we bring you some highlights from the latest wave of India Human Development Survey. Now, I know many of you are eager to get your hands on the IHDS data, and we are preparing the data files as fast as we can for public release. But until then, we thought you might like to hear some of the headline results of some of the analysis that some of my colleagues are doing. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to the panelists on the screen. I'll introduce them in the order they will be speaking. The first panelist is Professor Sharan Sharma. Sharan is an assistant professor, research professor at University of Maryland. Is also a visiting scholar at NCER. He is a survey methodologist by training with a PhD from University of Michigan, and he leads our methodological research at the IHDS team. Before he joined us, we actually didn't do a lot of methodological research, so I'm so glad you are with us, Sharan. Our second speaker is going to be Dr. Ruchi Jain, who is an associate professor, associate fellow at NCER with a PhD in demography from International Institute of Population Sciences. Ruchi does research on reproductive health issues, but she was also the primary trainer for our interviewers on gender questions. So she'll be speaking a little to you about training interviewers. Our third speaker will be Dr. Athira Vinod, who is a postdoctoral fellow at NCER. She has a PhD in economics from University of Nottingham, and she works on issues related to education. Our fourth speaker will be Dr. Debasis Barik, who is a senior fellow at NCAER. He has completed his PhD from International Institute of Population Sciences and has worked extensively on health and family change. And for IHDS, he also was responsible for quality control and has published pretty extensively in both Indian and international journals. Our fourth speaker will be Dr. Dibyasree Ganguly, who is an associate fellow at NCER with a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University. She works on women's time use, men's and women's responsibilities in India, and also on adolescence. Our final speaker will be Dr. Pallavi Choudhuri, who is a senior fellow and deputy director of National Data Innovation Center at NCER. She completed her PhD in economics from University of Wyoming and has published many papers in international journals on both gender and social safety nets. I also welcome NCER's new Director General, Mr. Suresh Goyal, who took office in January. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me. As we start, we're really excited to bring you some of the latest results on gender changes in India from 3 waves of India Human Development Survey. The IHDS, which started in 2004, was completed, the last wave was completed in 2022-24. Pallavi, can you show the slides on IHDS data? Okay. This basically provides us with a longitudinal perspective to see how families and life in Indian society are changing over time, particularly with a focus on some of the policy changes that are also taking place. Okay. We began with a sample of over 41,000 households located in all unions, territories, and states, with the exception of Andaman, Nicobar, and Lakshadweep, and were planning to follow all of these households over time. As you know, some of the households cannot easily be contacted, some move, and so on. So between wave 1 and wave 2, which was conducted in 2011-12, 83% of the households surveyed in wave 1 were available for re-interview in wave 2. In wave 3, 78% of the households that were surveyed in wave 2 were re-interviewed, and we actually picked back some of the households we had lost from wave 1. So the data for all 3 waves is available for 37,284 households, which includes the root households as well as some of the splits when brothers separate. In each wave, we added some households to ensure that representativeness remains and that our sample is not totally affected by attrition. Next slide, please. With IHDS 3, we interviewed over 47,000 households. The number of households increased because we added 7,000 new households between wave 1, wave 2, and wave 3. The sample is located in 34 states and union territories of India, over 1,400 villages and 1,000 urban blocks. The number of households that we interviewed is over 47,000, which includes over 2 lakh individuals. We also interviewed over 37,000 ever married women aged 15 to 49, information from whom would be particularly relevant in today's presentation. Over 12,000 children ages 8 to 11 were given basic reading and writing tests, and we thank our team for sharing their tests with us because we replicated those. And for all of these households, we also wanted to understand the context in which they live. So we collected information on the community context, infrastructure, wages, etc., for 46,000 sampling blocks, over 2,400, for over 2,400 community blocks, 4,600 schools and medical facilities were also interviewed. With each primary sampling unit, we would usually interview 1 private and 1 government school, 1 private and government medical facility. So that provides us a fairly holistic information about India's social transformation. For all of us, research on gender is our passion. And if it is at the core of the kind of societal transformation we are trying to trace. But getting good data on gender is not easy by any means. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to some of our panelists to talk about how we elicited data, why is it important to collect data on gender, and so on. So Sharan, as a survey methodologist, you look extensively at the characteristics of individuals and how to ensure that we get good data, accurate data. Can you tell us a little bit about whether it matters as to whom we interview? Does it matter whether we interview men or women?
Okay. Thanks, Sonal. First of all, I think great to be part of this event. I think the question of whether there are differences in responses between male and female respondents, and the quick answer would be yes, right? And the long answer obviously is a lot more nuanced than just that. Just to be very clear, we're not talking about responses between male and female respondents on individual questions, such as their attitudes, but we're talking about differences between responses garnered from male and female respondents when they talk on behalf of their household, when they are reporting household level data. And those are the sort of differences that we are really interested in. Okay. And we asked ourselves that same question, right? And it's very common for large scale surveys like IHDS when we go into a household to pick someone who's the most knowledgeable member of the household. In most cases, this happens to be the male head of the household, but that isn't always the case. So we had our interviewers record who the respondent was to several sections of our household questionnaire. And if we just focus on a pretty important section of our household questionnaire, which is the consumption and expenditure module, which essentially garners things like for example, the monthly amount of rice consumed or the annual expenditure expenses. These are the sort of things that we collect across about 50 items. Okay? Turns out that of our entire sample, we had about 18,000 homes where females were respondents to these questions. And that's a pretty sizable sample size. It's about 37% of our entire sample size. And this gives us a great opportunity now to study how responses differ between males and female respondents for their households. Okay, so this is a slide that is an example of the sort of differences that we can see between household level data reported by male respondents and female respondents. Okay. Now, if you focus on the leftmost panel, that shows the reported average annual children's education expenses reported. Okay? Straight off, we can see that there are pretty significant differences between whether the respondent was a male on an average or a female. So, for example, here we can see that the average annual children's education expenses reported by a male respondent was 11,000 rupees. And it's significantly higher at about 12,750 rupees for a female. That's about a 16% difference between the genders in terms of household reporting. Again, to clarify, these are what are called adjusted means, which means they sort of factor out differences due to the fact that female respondents could be coming from households with a certain profile versus male respondents from a different profile. So these are all sort of equalized to make it a fairer comparison. So yeah, pretty big, significant differences there. On the other hand, if you look at the panel on the right, which is the average monthly expenses on vegetables, fruits, and nuts. Okay, here you find the reverse picture, which is males actually tend to report a higher expense for their household as compared to females. It's not as much as the 16% that we saw for annual children's education expenses. But again, this is it's at a 6% difference between male and female respondents. And you also have a number of categories which are exemplified by the panel in the middle, which is the average annual footwear, clothing, and bedding expenses. Not much of a difference there. It's just about 100 rupee difference on about about a 6,800 sort of an average figure. Okay, so I think again the three key takeaways are, yes, there are differences between males and female respondents when they report on behalf of their household. That said, I think we don't see very dramatic differences, which is really good news for us, right? The one that we just saw, the education expenses, that's a bit of an exception. In most cases, the differences are less than 10%, which actually is good news for survey researchers. Okay. The other takeaway is that these differences are very category dependent. Okay, we really, this part of the research really doesn't get into the causal mechanisms that may be causing these differences, but one can really guess as and very intuitively say that a lot of these differences are actually being driven by the sort of gender roles, the knowledge that gender knowledge, gender experiences, and gender identities that are driving these differences. So there's a lot of literature that shows, for example, that women tend to be invested in long-term children's outcomes like health and education, and that may be driving these sort of higher expenses on reported expenses for women. Interestingly, we also found that females actually tend to spend more time in responding to education expenses on their children. So those are sort of very interesting insights that that have come up from the data.
Sharan, this is fascinating, and I suspect it differs by North and South because we often find that men do shopping in North India, whereas women are more likely to do shopping in South India, and that may also affect the responses. But also, it's very easy to say that you focus on respondent gender. But we also recognize that it's not easy to interview women interviewers. And you have looked at some of, or women respondents, and you have looked at some of the difficulties in interviewing women. Can you tell us a little more about it?
Sure. I think you're exactly correct. I think, like they say, it takes two to tango. The respondent is one part of the equation, and then there's the interview part of the equation. And, even if within respondents, just so here's a classic example that we had, in terms of just, you know, interviewing female respondents. This wave of IHDS was the first wave where we did a very intensive effort to track down migrant respondents. And what do we mean by that? It means at some point of time there were these members who were part of the root household that have since then migrated out. I think a classic example would be married out daughters who were part of the root household. They got married and have now moved out, to their husbands' families. In this wave of IHDS, we collected the telephone numbers of these migrants, and we made an intensive effort to call them up and conduct interviews among them. One of the things that we did was at the root household, when we took the numbers of these migrants, we had the root household actually call the migrant up and tell them that there's going to be a call coming from NCAER to you for a separate migrant interview. Turns out that out for about 46,000 such migrant IHDS members, 50% of that were married out daughters. And despite the fact that we had the numbers with us, despite the fact that there was a call being made from the root household, getting to these married out daughters was not easy. We actually made close to 110,000 calls, a lot of intensive effort to follow up. The first step in access issues was just gatekeeping, and that's the thing that we've tried to focus on this ongoing piece of research that we're doing, which is that access to female respondents are often controlled by male members. So even at the root household, we didn't get the cell phone number of the migrant herself. That was the case only in about 41% of the cases. In the vast majority of the cases, the numbers that were given to us, even though we had said we wanted to talk to the married out daughter, it was the husband's number, or it was some male member in the home, or even a shared mobile number. And if you see the next slide, what that means for us is it has a lot of implications in terms of measurement, not just in terms of non-response, but also proxy measurement. And I'll talk about that in a few seconds from now. But for now, let's just look at this slide that compares two scenarios. One is when we obtained the number of the migrant and we called her. That's the chart that you can see, the one on the left. And the one on the right is when we obtained a shared mobile number and we were trying to contact the female married out migrant. And you can see upfront that there is a huge difference in the sorts of non-response rates that we've got from these. When we had the number of the migrant, we achieved a completed rate of about 46%, which actually compares very, very well even internationally. But that number dramatically drops to just 12%, right? Which is a huge difference. We're talking about an 88% non-response rate when a shared mobile is given, which means we call this number, we are just not able to get through to the female respondent. And if we drill down on these reasons for non-response in the next slide, we sort of split, and we were able to do this because we had our systems for IHDS ready to record what are called disposition codes, where we could record each outcome of every call made to these sample units. So here you can see non-contact was a big reason why we couldn't get across to the shared mobile number. It accounts for about 49% points out of 88% points of the non-response. But something more interesting happens. You can see the gatekeeping phenomenon actually playing out very sort of starkly when a shared mobile is given versus when the number belongs to the migrant. So a lot of times when we called up, the male member would pick up and say, call back. And then when you called back, they would just not answer the call, or they would cut the call while we were talking to them. Okay. Interestingly, if you look at just the column of migrants, you can see that even when the number belonged to the migrant, it was the gatekeeper who picked up the call, which was actually quite an interesting finding for us. These are what we would call just soft refusals. They just don't want to talk to us, or the gatekeeper just doesn't want to give us access to the female member, and we end up sort of then losing, respondents that way. Furthermore, it's just not non-response. Even when we actually made contact and we elicited cooperation from that sample unit, oftentimes the male member would say, "Why do you want to talk to her? Just talk to me instead." So, even when we had the migrant phone number, that proxy interview rate was 17%, which is not an ignorable number. And that went up even higher when it was a shared mobile number. Something that I'm not shown on this slide is when the number was actually that of the husbands or the senior member, this proxy interview rate went up to even of about 40%, which is stark. So there's a bit of a double whammy here when we want to interview female respondents. It's first and foremost non-response, getting access, and then secondly, just not getting interviews from the respondent. They're all proxy respondents, which may not always work out when we especially want to get responses on things like sensitive questions like contraception and so forth, right? So just to sum up,
Thank you,
yes,
Sharan.
I think it is. These were sort of big issues that we faced, and we started research on this particular topic.
No, this is fantastic, Sharan, and it's really very clear to listening to you that men and women may give different responses to certain questions. And it may be particularly important to talk women directly when we are dealing with their issues that are of most relevant to them, particularly things like marriage, family behavior, contraception, care for the children, and so on. At the same time, we also know that, based on what you have said, that getting access to women is quite difficult. And so with IHDS, what we tried to do was we tried to have female interviewers working in a team so that certain questions and certain sections of interviews were only done by women interviewers with women respondents. But that again is not an easy job. After all, your women interviewers face the same challenges that rest of the women in India face. And how we handle that is an interesting aspect of IHDS research. And I want to turn to Ruchi Jain for Ruchi to talk about some of these issues. Ruchi, you worked extensively with training women
so
interviewers.
You have raised an important question.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Sonal. Thank you, Sonal. So you have raised an important question. The issue of who conducts interview is important for data quality. So coming to I strongly believe that having women interview women is not just desirable but necessary, especially when discussing sensitive topics such as fertility or family planning or household decision making or violence. So women respondents are often more comfortable opening up to another women, and that improves both the quality and the reliability of data. But however, we also knew that implementing this would be quite challenging. So what are those challenges? I'll be discussing about them one by one. So the very first challenge that we faced was the issue of shyness among the women interviewers. Many of these interviewers had prior experience of working on similar kind of surveys, and they were comfortable asking sensitive or personal questions. But for some, this was entirely a new survey, and they felt hesitant or shy in asking sensitive questions. So building confidence and communication skills among these women became an important component of our training. So how we did that? We conducted separate training sessions exclusively for women so that they can practice questions, clarify doubts, and ask questions without hesitation. And this small setting helped us build confidence among them. At the same time, we also conducted repeated mock interviews so that they can improve their communication skills and become fluent and consistent over time in asking questions. Technology was another important dimension. So basically, our survey was CAPI based and was conducted on computers. So it required a basic level of digital and computer usage device. Yeah. So national statistics show that there is a significant gender gap in computer and digital device usage in India. Our data also reflects this gender gap in computer usage. So, among all graduates, only about 39% of women know how to use computers compared to 61% of men. And this is really very low. So, initially, handling computers or service softwares was challenging for some women. So, how we addressed that? We conducted repeated training sessions and practice sessions and corrected their mistakes during the training sessions. Yeah. So, thirdly, team structure also mattered a lot. So, to ensure the safety of the women interviewers, the team was carefully composed of two men and two female members. So, this balanced composition not only enhanced their security during travel and field visits, but also created a supportive environment. So, in finally, I would like to conclude by saying that it was not just about hiring women, but also creating an environment where they could work comfortably without any hesitation. So, over time, with many of these women interviewers became confident in their roles and they became highly skilled. So, that's all. Thank you from my side.
Thank you, Ruchi. And I just want to highlight that, what we faced and how we dealt with it in IHDS is something that is a learning experience for all of us. And I think it's relevant for all work situations, not just the survey situation.
Yeah.
But now let me turn a little bit to the actual results of what we are finding. I'd like to turn to Dr. Athira Vinod. Athira, tell us a little bit about what you are seeing as in terms of trends in gender educational attainment.
Sure. Thank you, Sonal. So firstly, we've known for the past few years that India has nearly achieved universal primary school enrollment. So enrollment rates at the primary level is close to 100% for both males and females. So in terms of access to schooling, the gender gap has largely disappeared. And our latest round of the IHDS actually gives us even more reasons to be positive. So, moving beyond enrollment, we're seeing that there has been a consistent narrowing of gender gaps even in educational attainment. So, if you look at these graphs here, these show you the mean years of schooling completed among males and females aged 25 to 29. So on the right-hand side, we see the trends across the three waves of the IHDS for rural areas. So what we're seeing is that there has been a consistent increase in the mean years of schooling completed for both males and females, but the increase has been much higher among females. So increasing from 4.2 years in 2004-5 to 8.9 years in 2022-24, so considerably reducing the gender gap. If you look at the right-hand side panel, which shows the trends in urban areas, so of course, in urban areas, the gender gap tends to be much lower than in rural areas to begin with, but we see a very similar story. We're seeing that the increase, again, in mean years of schooling has been much higher among females, who by 2022-24 have nearly closed the gender gap. So overall, what we're seeing is a very strong catch-up story for women, especially in the rural areas, who were, the most behind 20 years back. So what we're seeing now is that females are now more likely to remain in school and complete their education. But what about where they are being educated? So, India's education landscape has undergone a lot of structural changes in the last 2 decades. Parents have now increasingly shifted towards private schooling for their children. So they have a strong preference to send their children to private schools over government schools and, supplement their education with private tuitions. And our IHDS data also shows the same trends. So if you look at the left-hand side panel, here we see the percentage of children aged 6 to 14 who are enrolled in private schools. So what we're seeing is, again, a consistent increase in private school enrollment among both males and females. So between 2004-05 and 2011-12, there was a bigger increase in private school enrollment among males, which is why we see the gender gap sort of widening in that period. However, in the last 10 years, so between 2011-12 and 2022-24, we're seeing that the private school enrollment among males has sort of remained stagnant, whereas it has increased among females. So that has actually sort of narrowed the gender gap. If you look at the right-hand side, we again see a similar story. So here, this graph shows the percentage of children aged, again, 6 to 14 who undertake private tuitions. And there again, we're seeing that, between 2004-05 and 2011-12, there was a bigger increase in private tuition uptake among males, which resulted in widening of the gender gap. But between 2011-12 and 2022-24, the increase was higher among females, which has again brought down the gender gap. So we clearly see that private investment in education has increased. It seems like investment is first made towards boys, and then the investment for girls sort of picks up. So we've made a lot of progress in terms of narrowing the gender gap at the school level. But what about higher education? So for instance, STEM education is one area which is predominantly male dominated, right? So what does our IHDS data tell us in terms of the gender gap in STEM enrollment? Well, we are actually seeing a very different story across rural and urban areas. So these two graphs show you the percentage of individuals who are aged 18 to 25 enrolled in STEM education. So if you look at the left-hand side, which shows the trend for rural areas, what we're seeing is that the percentage of enrollment in STEM education was higher among males. So between 2004-05 and 2011-12, STEM enrollment mainly increased among males. But in the last 10 years, so between 2011-12 and 2022-24, we're also seeing STEM enrollment increasing for females, right? But of course, the gender gap still persists in rural areas. On the right-hand side, where we see the trends in urban areas, we're actually seeing the complete opposite of that. So we're seeing that STEM enrollment has increased for both males and females over the three waves, but the increase has actually been higher among females. And that has resulted in a consistent narrowing of the gender gap. So, if you go back to the educational attainment story, we see that the mean years of schooling has significantly increased among rural women, but it hasn't yet translated to equal access to more quantitative fields. However, we do see rural women slowly catching up with rural men. On the other hand, urban women have seemed to nearly caught up to urban men. Thank you.
Thank you, Athira. This is very interesting. It's also heartening to see this closing of gap on education. The question is that whether this improvement in educational gender gap translates into other areas of life. Debasis, you've been working a lot on sort of family demography. What do you see? Do you see sort of any catch up in other areas of life?
Yeah. Thank you, Sonal, for asking this very important question. Yes, we see a clear and measurable changes in family life, gender norms, and intergenerational expectation across waves. The shifts are gradual but structurally significant. Let me walk you through the evidence from IHDS. So let us first turn towards women's age at marriage. Right. So marriage still remains near universal among Indian women. In IHDS 3, we see more than 90% of the women are married by age 40 years. However, we see a significant decline in marriages at early ages. For example, teenage marriage that has basically halved down from 14% in 2004-5 to nearly 7% in 2022-24. Similarly, marriage in the early 20s has also gone down from 71% to 52% during the same period. And marriage in late 20s, that has also gone down close to 9 percentage points between the same time period. So this delay reflects longer schooling and greater parental aspirations. So education is not reducing marriage per se, but it is reshaping its timing, extending young women's premarital phase, and potentially expanding their exposure to work, mobility, and decision making. Next, moving towards their agency in partner choice. So among women aged 25 to 29 years, what do we see that in IHDS 3, close to 80% of the women reported their involvement in partner choice. And of them, 12% choose their partner by themselves. So women's participation in marriage decisions has increased steadily across IHDS OFs. This signals a shift from strictly arranged marriage towards a negotiated arrangements where daughters' preferences matter more than ever. So next, please. So along with this, we see a changing educational dynamics within marriage. With rising female education and delayed marriage, so this graph shows that now more women are marrying men less educated than themselves. This is a notable departure from the traditional pattern of hypergamy, where women used to marry a man of higher education than their own. So such marriages may gradually alter intra-household power dynamics. Educational advantage can translate into greater say in household decisions, investment in children's schooling, and long-term household well-being. While norms do not shift overnight, the structural basis of male education superiority is weakening over time. We also see a rise in both one-child families and daughter-only families between wave 1 and 3. Among mothers aged 35 to 49 years, the percentage with only one child, the blue line, that has increased from 7% in 2004-5 to 11% in 2022-24. There is also a steady rise in daughter-only families, the orange line, from 9% to 12% between the same time period. So smaller families are quite expected with higher female education, delayed marriage, and increased reproductive control. The rise in daughter-only families suggests weakening of the son preference. This raises a concern over the traditional support system where parents rely primarily on their sons for old age support. In the next slide, we will see if parental attitudes are changing to accommodate this family dynamics or not. So what do we see? So we see an increasing acceptance of daughters as a potential source of old age support. The left-hand side graph shows women's acceptance in living with daughters during old age. The first panel, when both son and daughter are available, 56% of the respondents in IHDS wave 3 expressed their willingness to live with daughters during old age. The expectation has grown significantly up between wave 2 and 3. In the second panel, when there is no son, only daughters, expectations from daughters are much higher. And these expectations have also strengthened over time. The right-hand side graph shows openness to receive financial support from daughters during old age. So the trend is similar, but financial expectations are slightly higher than living with daughters. So, overall implications, if you can see what we have seen over IHDS OIRs, there is a change in delayed marriage. Young women have greater voice in partner selection. We see a weakening of educational hypergamy. We see a rise in smaller families and daughter-only families, increasing legitimacy of daughters as economic and emotional support. So we can say education is reshaping not just individual outcomes, but intergenerational contracts. The idea of daughter as temporary member of natal families is gradually eroding. Instead, daughters are increasingly recognized as long-term contributors to family well-being. In sum, improved women's education is not confined to classroom or labor market. It is quietly reconfiguring marriage patterns, fertility behavior, and the moral economy of family support in India. Thank you.
Debasis, this is really fascinating. So, I mean, what we see is that there was a time when parents would say, I won't even drink water at my daughter's household. That is a concept that is fast disappearing, and women are willing to accept support from their daughters. Parents are changing and investing more in their daughters. The question is it the society changing to accept some of these transformations? Are there marital families willing to sort of fulfill some of these additional expectations? And that's something we'll really need to look at. Okay? So, Dibya, tell us a little bit about what you are seeing. We know that parents are trying to change with the times as public policies are also tried to sort of reduce the kind of drudgeries that women face. How do sort of all of these play out in the kind of responsibilities that women as adult members of the household bear?
Thank you, Sonal. This is exactly the focus of my today's presentation, to examine whether these broader changes are reflected in women's daily lives. I will start with women's independent mobility, then shift to domestic responsibilities and agency. So from this slide, from this diagram, we can see that women's independent mobility has improved from IHDS 1 to IHDS 3, but the much improvement is visible between IHDS 1 and IHDS 2 than IHDS 2 and IHDS 3. Ability to go alone to the health center has improved over time, but the difference between IHDS 2 and 3 is not statistically significant. Traveling short distance by train or bus is the most restricted form of mobility, but it has shown a significant improvement between IHDS 2 and IHDS 3. If we see by the place of residence of women, we can see that both rural and previous slide, please. For both rural and urban women, the independent mobility has improved over time across all destinations, but urban women consistently reported a higher mobility than the rural counterparts. So from this, it is evident that women's lives are changing. It's a positive change, but the pace is slow. In the next slide, we'll see what is happening inside the household. With the advancement of piped water and modern appliances, it is expected that domestic drudgery takes less effort than earlier. Fetching water, as we know that it's largely a women's work traditionally, women carried most of the burden of fetching water, but with the expansion of piped water, over time, from IHDS 1 to IHDS 3, time spent fetching water has declined for both men and women. From this diagram, we can see that, especially for rural women, earlier it was 60 minutes in a day they used to spend fetching water, which declined to 30 minutes in a day in the current round. On the other hand, hiring paid household help for childcare, cleaning, cooking, washing remains the prerogative of the rich, and which is 3%, which is very low across IHDS households, and the current round reported it's just 3%. In the next slide, we'll see IHDS 3, the current round, gathered information which is very interesting on household responsibilities, how it is divided by gender. So when we see it's about cooking, 78% of women reported that they usually do cooking versus 5% men. Areas where men dominate are taking primary responsibilities for vegetables and food shopping daily, along with management of daily expenses. So apart from household responsibilities, in the next slide, we'll see parental responsibilities, how it dominates women's daily lives. Among all who supervised children's education, children's daily homework, 61% are women. Among all who reported that they attend Parent Teachers Association meeting, 54% are women. So from this, it is clear that parenting responsibilities, which includes children's education and school engagement, is largely a women's responsibility. On the other hand, nearly 1 in 3 women reported that if women need to step outside of their household, they don't have anyone in the household who can take care of their children. Of this 32%, 28% reported that they usually carry their child wherever they go. This underscores the importance of strengthening childcare support and infrastructure in the public spaces too. Most interestingly, 58% of women reported that they believe if a mother works, it hurts their children. So, in the absence of adequate childcare support and infrastructure, parental responsibility is not only occupying a women's daily lives, but it shapes their mobility, career opportunities, and even how they see themselves. So, in these slides, we saw how women carry most of the household and parental responsibilities. In this slide, we are going to see, do women have the most say in household and parental decisions? So the most encouraging part is from IHDS 1 to IHDS 3, women's most say in all these domains has improved. But a clear divide, a gap exists between routine decisions and the major economic ones. Nearly 70% of women reported that they have the most say in cooking, which is traditionally a women's work. But when we shift to bigger decisions like child falls sick, buying expensive household items, land purchase, the percentage drops. So bigger the decision, smaller the percentage of women to have the most say. From these findings, we can see that while women carry most of the household and parental responsibilities, that does not always translate into being the primary decision maker. But the silver lining is women's agency is improving over time. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Dibya. This is really, really interesting. So what we see is that clearly there are improvements in education. There are sort of greater investments from parents and expectations on the part of parents from their daughters. Household decision making and responsibilities remain a mixed bag. Some of the policy improvements have reduced domestic drudgeries on women, but parenting responsibilities play an important part, and there is a lot of expectation from mothers in terms of participation in children's care, education, homework supervision, and so on. The question, really the million-dollar question for us is, or 64 crore question for us is, to what extent does it really translate into improvement in women's economic empowerment? And this is where I'd like to turn to Pallavi and have her speak a little bit about what's happening to women's employment in IHDS. But I also want to highlight that the way IHDS phrases the questions about employment are very different from NSS or periodic labor force survey. So, Pallavi, could you please start us off with sort of describing the difference between IHDS, PLFS, and then what you are seeing and where?
Yeah. Thank you, Sonal. Very interesting question, and that's exactly what I'll be speaking about. So we have here a comparison between the IHDS on the left-hand side and the NSSR PLFS on the right panel. And if you quickly take a look at the graph, we have chosen the year 22-23 for PLFS round, because that is the closest approximation, that provides the closest approximation for IHDS, as the bulk of our survey actually happened during that period. Very few states, like some of the northeastern states, were completed. It got completed in 2024 because of some delays, and then Andhra and Telangana. But most of the surveys happened in 22-23. So that's why we have used that PLFS round for the comparison. Now, what you'll see in this graph is very interesting difference between IHDS and NSS PLFS. If you see the right panel, and I believe almost everyone is aware of this trend, between 2004-5 and 2011-12, the NSS data showed a huge drop. Whether you look at the rural or whether you look at urban, the drop was higher in rural, but overall there was a drop in female workforce participation. And then if you look at 2022-23, you'll see a sharp increase. And this is mainly driven by the rural area. And again, if you sort of deep dive into the data, you will probably see that this increase actually came from the agriculture sector, females' participation in the agriculture sector. Now let's move to the IHDS, and we see something very different. We see that this is actually holding steady. And this could be because the way IHDS asks some questions is very different from the labor force surveys. So in comparison to NSS or PLFS, where you're asked about the principal or subsidiary status, what IHDS does is it asks about the engagement in a predefined set of activities, very exhaustive set of activities, and the time spent in each of them. So we give question prompts in who took part in household business, who took part in a household agricultural farm or animal husbandry. We ask, for animal husbandry, for example, we ask whether they have livestock in their family right now, or if they don't, then whether they had in the past 12 months, just to make sure that we don't sort of that we measure correctly. And then we also ask about wage work or non-wage subsistence or salaried work. And so that means, and then for each of these categories, we ask about the time spent. So how many days they worked and the number of hours they worked. And so what we observe is that between 2004-5 and 2011-12, the drop that you see in NSS, we don't actually observe that sharp drop. It's a very minor change from 68 to 65% in rural area, and in urban area, we actually saw a very minor increase. Coming to 2022-24, hardly any change. So what we observed is that our statistics on female workforce participation is holding steady. Now, the NSS, just a disclaimer that NSS, obviously for PLFS data, you have several rounds, 2017 and so onward. So, and they provide certain trends. Now, we cannot comment on those because we don't have data on the intervening areas. What we see is that the decadal change is actually holding very steady. And that's a very encouraging sign in some respects. Also, I would like to point out that for comparison, we have included for IHDS data, we have included uh, at least 20 to 40 hours worked in a particular year for us to be, because this allows us to compare with the NSS principal or subsidiary status. That means that they worked at least for a month in the previous 1 year. Now, the issue is, so what is the emerging hotspot? And specifically, I would here like to talk about the challenges that rural college graduates are facing. Now, very interestingly, if you look at the left panel, we observe that whether you look at the urban or whether you look at the rural areas, the percentage of women aged between 25 to 59 with college degree and above have actually gone up. And we chose 25 to 59 because that's when that's the peak working age, and so we see that by the time you're expected to actually have the graduate degree. And very interestingly, the increase was actually higher in rural area compared to the urban area between 2011-12 and 2022-24. But the question is, how is this translated into work participation? Now, if you look at the right panel, you'll see that in rural areas, between 2004-5 and 2011-12, there was a very minor drop, hardly if any. But if you look at 22-24, you see a slight, you see quite a bit of drop. It's about 37.9%. In comparison, in the urban area, we see an increase between 2004-5 to 2011-12, and between the last two rounds, like the latest and the previous round, it's more or less heading holding steady. So looks like the urban job market for women is either stagnating or it's steady in some respect. It's not expanding. But the rural area is clearly, that there something else is going on. So the number of college graduates has increased, but there is not enough good jobs for women. But let's deep dive into some of the numbers. And so where are these rural college graduates working in rural area? Now, if we compare across the three rounds, we observe that the college graduate engagement in salaried work, it increased between 2004-5 to 2011-12, but it dropped in the latest round, and it dropped substantially to 13.7%. And that could be because the pool has increased, but the number of jobs have not really gone up. And also there are limited opportunities for rural female college graduates in rural areas. Where do you work? You can either work like the state, respective states employ. So you could be working for the state government, or you could be working as an Anganwadi worker or school teacher, or you could be working as officer or mate for some of the public works program like NRLM and so on. But very interestingly, if you sort of look at the other columns, we see that those with college degree, they're even willing to work for casual wage work. So unlike the previous two rounds where the number was less than 1% for agricultural labor or non-agricultural labor, we see a slight uptick in agricultural labor or non-agricultural labor to 2.9%, like close to 3%. And the first column, agriculture and allied, that's like the farm sector, whether you have own agricultural land or own livestock, even that has slightly increased to 28%. We also observe for business, like if you have an own enterprise, That's like that increased between 2004-5 to 2011-12, but it's very small dip between the last round and then this round. So looks like women are willing to work even for casual wage work. So this is not really a supply side factors. There could be other things that are holding back women. And that's definitely not supply side factors. That's definitely not norms, because women are willing to work, and that's why you see the engagement in all different types of work. Thank you.
This is really, really interesting, Pallavi. I mean, there is such a debate between supply and demand factors in what affects female labor supply. And you're sort of pointing out that when we start looking at college graduates who should be generally getting education because they want to work, they have fewer children, some of the domestic responsibilities or drudgery kind of activities are declining, they should be more likely to be in the labor force. And yet we don't see that. Now, the other challenge, of course, is that there seems to be a tremendous emphasis in public policies on creating work for women through entrepreneurship. So, will you talk to us a little bit about what's your sense about what's the role of the policy and what are the factors that are playing out?
Right, that's a very interesting question. And if you actually look at the entrepreneurship landscape, there has been a lot of emphasis on self-help groups, huge increase in female self-help group membership over the last few years. And that's also showing in the IHDS latest round. But very interestingly, if we compare between the previous round and this round, we don't really observe a very significant uptick in entrepreneurship by self-help group members. And that's not to discount this program, because we have to remember that IHDS happens in a staggered fashion. So there are some states which we interviewed earlier, some later, and could be that some of these programs, like NRLT and others, were either in the nascent stage or they were introduced little bit later. So it's not really showing up. But I think I would like to point out one thing, that a lot of SAGs face, the big constraint that they face is, they don't have access to market, and the central government has launched a very interesting program in the budget this year, which I believe will help bridge this barrier, which is, the She Mart program. And the idea is they will provide support to these SAGs and help them connect they have access to the local market, but not really to the value chain. So the idea is that they will be connected to the value chain and a larger market. So, and in essence, they will also be provided training in like digital skills and other skills. So I think perhaps in the next round, we'll see significant increase in entrepreneurship. But yes, it's in a very nascent stage, these initiatives.
I think what we are dealing with is the mismatch between aspirations and opportunities. Aspirations have clearly grown, right? I mean, there is so much more investment in education. There are many more college graduates, women, even in rural areas, and opportunities are growing, but much slowly. And so it's this mismatch that is sort of something that is catching our attention. But thank you, everyone. It's been very interesting discussion. What I'm going to do now is turn to the audience for some of the questions that they might have put in the chat box. There are several people who have also raised their hands. There are two sets of questions which are sort of very similar, coming from a variety of people. So let me just respond to them all at a time. Okay. The first question is, when is IHDS data going to be available? Okay. I am really gratified by your interest, and it is our intention to make it available as soon as possible. Let me just highlight to you the reason why we are facing some of the challenges, which we are overcoming, but it has taken time. Specifically, I think that between waves of IHDS, doing surveys in India has become more difficult. And consequently, we often have some missing data in some variables. People respond to your questions, but some questions they would refuse to answer, they don't know the answer to. And those are quite important people in important households. So, what we are trying to do is we are trying to create imputed values for some of this missing data. We'll release the original data and imputed data simultaneously so that users can make their own judgment. But that way, when you are doing analysis by income groups or employment groups, you will not have certain missing households who may be very interesting households. So the short answer is we expect to send data files out for processing for public release in a month or so, and they should be available in quarter third of 2026. So please bear with us. We are working very hard to prepare the data files and create documentation for public release. The second set of question was, will you ever have IHDS 1, 2, and 3 data harmonized so that the same variable, same category, so that people can do analysis over time? And I should tell you that as of now, we have no plans for harmonizing this data. That is a separate project, will be requiring additional funding, and we'll look for it and we hope to do it, but it won't be in an immediate future. The third set of questions center around training. Will you be conducting training for users on how to use IHDS data? Yes, it is our intention to create some of the training programs. Some of it will be done online. Some of them might be done in person in some of the institutions within different states so that diverse groups of people can participate in the training and increase the user pool. We found with our IHDS 1 release that when we first released the data in public domain, the use was largely by US and Europe based graduate students and faculty, and not as much in India as we would have liked. In order to encourage the use within India, we actually carried out a lot of training, and that has really made a difference. And so, yes, we intend to do a similar effort, outreach effort for IHDS 3. Now, that said, let me turn to some of the questions that people have raised and the hands that have been raised. I'm just giving you a moment to get into that. I think I had seen some question from Sona Mitra. Sona, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question you had? Since Sona may not be able to easily ask, let me repeat her question. Sona was asking, are these trends sort of similar on employment trends, similar in urban and rural areas? And I think, Pallavi, you could expand on it a little bit on what you have already presented.
For the college graduates, the trend is slightly different. We don't really see such a huge drop in salaried workers, like I said earlier. But I mean, it's a very minor difference between the previous, like if you look at between 2004-5 and 2020, like the current round, there is hardly any change. So decadal change is almost like missing. So looks like it's almost stagnating, and we have to deep dive a little bit more to figure out why we are observing such things in the urban areas.
Wonderful. Sona had another question, which was for Debasis. Debasis, is the delayed age in marriage more for urban areas or rural areas?
So actually, this delayed age at marriage has actually gone up in both rural and urban areas over two time periods. So, but we see a more higher basically delayed age at marriage now in rural areas. And the aged marriage is delayed aged marriage, that part is being contributed by the illiterate portion more than the other portions. So this is the pattern what we are seeing from this data. Those with no
Thank you.
education, so they had choose delayed marriage more.
Pallavi, there is a question from Shirid Saha, where she asked, are there any questions on women's intake of unconditional cash transfers, like Lakshmi Bhandar in West Bengal, as many women consider this a part of income as well?
That's a little difficult question because for benefits, we have, we ask the central government schemes broadly. During our training, we ask the interviewers to ask some specific schemes, like state-specific schemes. Some of those, especially like, the very well-known schemes like Lakshmi Bhandar and all of that. But what we understand, and this is the area of further research, is that there are so many schemes. Women know how much they have received. They don't always know which scheme it has come from. So some know, but not everyone. So it's a little fuzzy area. But yes, women have received cash transfers, but sometimes it's difficult to identify state-specific schemes. But broadly, we try to identify the very well-known central government schemes.
I think that one of the challenges that we had faced was that even respondents who are getting cash benefits don't always know what schemes, specific schemes that these benefits are coming from. So I think IHDS data will provide you information about benefits transfer, but differentiating between very specific schemes may not be possible with IHDS. So for example, daughter welfare schemes, they are all sort of often clubbed together. Okay? There is a question from Mrityunjay Kumar on, are all districts included in the survey? Is the data representative at district level? Sharan, this is the one for you.
Yes, so not all districts are covered in India, but then for sure you could still analyze data at the district level. It would be still be representative at that level, right?
I actually
there's a
differ
yeah.
here.
So there's a bit of a orientation or philosophical difference in how you look at it. I think as long as, because we've stratified by the district and we have selected PSUs within district, you could still look at it. But if you really wanted the weights at those weights are actually developed at a state into urban rural level. So you could still analyze them, they're representative, but they're still not weighted at the state level. So
I would let me actually differ with this, Sharan, on this one.
Yep.
IHDS data, when it was first collected, or survey when it was first designed, was designed to be representative at the national level. Our state samples were not large enough to provide state level estimates. You could differentiate between different states and do comparisons, but you could not easily say that estimates of women's employment derived from IHDS for UP are representative at state level for UP. For this, you would need much larger sample, and this is where we suggest you turn to PLFS or NFHS or other data sets. As far as districts are concerned, our district samples are too small to be able to provide district level estimates. However, you can do comparisons between similar districts. For example, districts where there is a high proportion of road transportation. They could come from Kashmir, they could come from Kanyakumari. You could do those comparisons. But you cannot necessarily derive district level estimates out of IHDS data. There is a question from Amrita Chatterjee that I will turn to Debasis. Is there data on time spent by women in elder care activities?
So, time spent by women in elder care activity. We don't have a specific question related to that. But what we have basically asked that in ADL section of the questions, so we are asking in the activities of daily living portion, we are asking this for person of age 50 years and above this time, and those who are not able to do activities by their own, functional limitations are there. So for them, we are asking who in the household help them to doing certain things. And there we are listing basically household members as well as non-household members or hired care. But we don't have actually question related to time spent on elderly care. That we don't have.
I think time use data, you will turn to the time use survey. IHDS data is best for connecting different parts of people's lives on a sort of a more descriptive level. So we can tell you who takes care of, who provides physical support to the elderly, but we cannot tell you how much time is spent on it. Pallavi, I think you were pointing to a question from Mamta Choudhuri. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think the question is which of the schemes are being covered related to the Ministry of Women and Child Development? And we do cover maternity benefit, Janani Suraksha Yojana. We also have widow pension. I think broadly, if we will want to look at like how much they have received, these are the schemes. But I think that's about it, Sonal, right?
Right. And we also have data on some of the Ujjwala Yojana and so on.
Yes, yes, yes.
So that
Ujjwala
can be
Yojana.
a possible
And we also,
analysis.
yes, Jan Dhan, Ujjwala Yojana, yes. So there are a lot of contextual questions and even like some questions on girl child registration and several other things. But yes.
So one other interesting question Mamta Chaudhary asked was, does IHDS enable analysis of factors that influence women's entry or exit from the labor force? I think that this time, ours is a cross-sectional data set, but what we tried to do was actually identify phases in women's lives. For example, before marriage, between marriage and first child, and following the birth of the first child, as to whether they participated in the labor force, which will allow us some understanding of the women's life course during which women enter or drop out of the labor force. We also have some data around some of the households and potential barriers to women's labor force participation. So I believe interesting analysis can be done, but not necessarily specifically around entry and exit, but somewhat would allow us to draw some of the inferences. Then there are some questions around, let me just get to this. Pallavi, will you talk a little bit more about what was the reason IHDS asked the questions about the employment the way it did? Because there seem to be several questions around difference between IHDS and NSS PLFS.
So yes, I think, the NSS PLFS is more like a one-shot questionnaire, and it's the interviewers follow a very complicated structure to arrive that question. If you look at the manual, you can sort of figure out how it is, but it's more like a one-shot questionnaire, whether you work and for how many days you've worked, and so on. So what we did was in 2019, we carried out an experiment just to look at the IHDS questionnaire and how it compares to NSS questionnaire. And because here in IHDS, we actually ask detailed activity. We ask whether you have, if you have a agricultural farm, have you worked in a farm? Who has worked in a farm for how many days, for how many hours? Do you have livestock? Then who has worked for how many days, for how many hours? Has anyone worked on a salaried job? And so on and so forth. So it's possible for a person to actually have more than one or two, even more than two engagements during a particular year in different industries. And so, there could be some significant differences there between IHDS and NSS because of this particular thing. Also, when you ask women or a household, you go to a rural area or a very traditional household, you ask whether women work. Often the response is women, oh, no, women don't work because their engagement in own farm or engagement in own household and enterprise is considered as an extension of their domestic activities. So sometimes it really doesn't really feature in, it doesn't get considered as an economic activity even by the women themselves. So these question prompts, do you do these activities and how many days you have participated in these activities, gives actually a higher estimate. And we did this experiment 2019 in rural area. We found a significant increase if we use IHDS style activity-based questionnaire rather than the NSS style status-based questionnaire.
And for the same households, this is very important. For the same people.
Yeah. For the same households, we asked the same women. We asked, the two different type of questions. The questionnaire method was different, and we found the same women was giving, the same person was giving different responses, and so that's what was very interesting.
So just to sort of augment this, I remember at one point in time doing field work in a village where we were there for several days, and we would pass this kirana shop one after another day, and the woman was sitting there selling drinks and candies and whatever. And by chance, her household happened to be the one we interviewed. When we interviewed her, we basically just started out by asking her, are you working? And the answer was, I don't work. Well, but then my question was, but I have been passing your shop day after day and you've been working in it. And why don't you say that you are working? And she says, but the shop belongs to my husband. I just help out. So how can I be considered worker? Okay. Which is what actually led us to develop the kind of questions that we ask, which are status. Instead of using what do you do, we ask, whether your household has a farm, whether your household has a shop, whether your household has a cow. And then we ask who takes care of them. And that makes a big difference. Which to some extent accounts for the greater labor force participation rate captured by IHDS than by some of the other labor force surveys. Okay? There are a couple of very interesting questions in here. One is from Sukanya Sarkhel, who says, are there any questions about management of menstrual hygiene in IHDS? Yes, there are some questions, Sukanya. I don't know that they will satisfy you totally, but there are certainly some questions. And I'm sure, given how much work you've done with IHDS data in your other work, you will be using those. Sukanya also highlighted the fact that we used to have IHDS user conferences at some point in time when we had very special funding for IHDS user conferences, which was a lot of fun. And we actually ended up having a book published out of some of the papers presented at one of these conferences. Do you have plans for doing something like that in future? Usually what ends up happening for us, everyone, is that we are a small team and we are focused on one activity at a time. So there was the activity that focused on fill the next round of IHDS. Then there was the activity focused on get the IHDS data out in public domain. Our hope is that our next phase of activity will focus on both building the user community and a training program, but that will require some sort of a planning of a new program and a new set of funding and new set of activities. There are a number of questions around that are quite interesting. One is from Shubhranshu Kumar. Does IHDS 3 cover data on soft skills? Shubhranshu, we were very interested in soft skills. We did not know how to ask questions about soft skills. So what we have is a sort of an interesting set of questions. What we did was we asked our interviewers to evaluate their interaction with the respondents. Okay. Was the respondent clear in his or her response? Did they understand the questions that were being asked? Did they feel confident in their responses and so on? And we think that these are actually excellent measures of soft skills. If you can interact with an interviewer whom you see as sort of coming from an external source with some level of bureaucratic authority, perhaps the same soft skills and interaction skills apply in your work and in other places. So I think there might be some very interesting analysis possible. There is also a question on why is there no health aspect discussed here from T. Mahesh Kumar. Mr. Mahesh Kumar, we actually had to make a choice on what we would present right now, and we chose not to speak about health at the moment. But there is some very interesting analysis being done by both Debasis and Ruchi on health and healthcare expenditure. Ruchi's been working on delivery care. And you will be seeing this in due course. Our expectation is that our users will also be doing some of this analysis as they go along. Okay. There are several questions that sort of cluster around attrition of the respondents. Now, here is where I would actually like to express some caution for users of IHDS data, and many of you are, so I hope you will take this to heart. Any study depends on its design. Our design was to have it a nationally representative study in 2004-5. Now, we go back to most of these households, or at least we try to go back to the households. We go back to the same areas which we covered, and we select some new households to ensure that our panel remains representative. But it is representing those areas. It is not representing newly grown areas. So, for example, between 2004 and 2024, places like Gurgaon and Noida grew enormously. Okay. And some of those areas would not have been part of our original sampling frame and would not be covered by the current round of IHDS. So any analyst who is using IHDS data should be cognizant of the challenges that are placed by longitudinal data collection. We will try to provide you with some description of the kind of selection bias that is involved in IHDS data. But when you use it, please be cognizant of the shortcomings of the data as well as its benefits. And I look forward to, NSS IHDS data so far has generated more than 1,200 papers and dissertations. I expect that similar kind of output will be coming out of the users, some of whom are on the listening, some of whom who are faculty whose students will be using the data. And we look forward to both your research as well as critical assessment of IHDS data, its strengths and its limitations. But with that, I would like to thank our panelists today. I would like to thank Mr. Suresh Goyal. I would like to thank all the people who are on panel or who are listening on the webinar from a variety of places like Japan, US, UK, and India. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to have you all here, and we look forward to this as a conversation that will continue. Goodbye. Good night. Thank you.